Secrets. We all have them. Some of us like to spend thousands of dollars on Fartboy9000's OnlyFans. Others like to go to dog parks completely covered in peanut butter. Though what happens when secrets are more shrouded in darkness and mystery? In this video, we're going to talk about the darkest unsolved mysteries from around the world. Timestamps, as always, are in the description below. It was just another day in the city of Ibadan, Nigeria. A group of motorcycle taxi drivers known as Okada riders received a disturbing call from a fellow colleague of theirs named Abakuda. Abakuda informed his friends and colleagues that during the night prior he had been lured and taken captive. Abakuda told his fellow Okada riders that he was being held in a cell, quote, underneath the earth, with 8 other individuals he had never met before. He described the building as a dilapidated, broken down site in a forest not too far from where they all worked, giving them detailed directions to get to where he was. After the call abruptly ended, dozens of Okada riders drove straight to the forest Abakuda mentioned. Their search party all agreed to venture out into the forest to look for their missing friend. As they were trekking through the dense forest, a man armed with a rifle jumped out in front of the group. The man shouted at them before opening fire. The group fled the forest, soon returning with an added 60 Okada drivers who wanted to help find Abakuda. The armed man never showed up this time, so the group continued the search. Later that day, they finally discovered the building Abakuda had mentioned. Hearing screams coming from inside the building, the Okada riders rushed inside. They were hit with a stench worse than anything they could have imagined. There were people chained up and barely alive who were in a catatonic state. They were immediately freed and police were soon called. In the building and other smaller ones surrounding it, there were personal items like shirts, shoes, and other clothes stashed away in large piles. The building's floorboards were soaked in blood. Flies were everywhere. Countless human skulls and body parts were found located on the property, with the overall estimated total victim count to be over 100. Also on the property were roughly 20 decomposed bodies scattered all across the perimeter. As the Okada riders were looking through the buildings, Abakuda managed to contact them via phone one last time. He said that he heard them walking and talking above him, though unfortunately the phone soon ran out of battery, and to this day, Abakuda and the presumed 8 other individuals in the room with him have never been found. When police initially arrived at the scene, they escorted any remaining individuals out of the building and blocked off the area. Over the next few days, Abakuda's friends and fellow Okada riders who came to help asked the police to assist in digging or just to help look for any underground location that Abakuda and 8 others were thought to still be in. You'd think this is the part where the Nigerian police would agree to help and dig up the floor or ground in the surrounding area to try and find the 9 missing people. Well, not in this case. They ignored the Okada riders and completely leveled and demolished the buildings, most likely further burying Abakuda and the 8 other kidnapped individuals in a now giant pile of rubble. Despite the efforts of those there actively trying to find the kidnapped individuals, they were never found. One survivor explained that she had been held captive for 6 years, which means that the operation had to have been going on for at least 6 years, though some believe it began much earlier. About 3 days after the House of Horror was exposed, one weird-ass dude was investigated. He was seen acting strange in town. Some people followed him around and discovered that he had been hoarding women's clothes and, well, underwear of many different sizes. He also happened to have several human tongues and bones in his possession. Yeah, it went from Quagmire to Hannibal Lecter real quick. Police were made aware of him, and before townspeople could get their hands on him, he was taken into custody. Nothing is really known about what happened to the man after this, but we can only hope he was thoroughly investigated. The sadistic operation that occurred in that forest is thought to be related to black magic and ritual sacrifices. Victims who were sadly tricked, kidnapped, and held by these people were, for lack of a better word, chopped up. Limbs and other body parts were likely taken and driven off to potential buyers, who would use them for rituals that these individuals believed would make them rich and affluent in their communities. Now, believe it or not, I'm not exactly well versed in human sacrifice rituals, though from reports online and more specifically in Nigeria, it's not that unheard of. Some people really believe that these rituals will change their lives in drastic ways and they will do anything for it to happen. Some of these rituals require human body parts, which most likely led to some people all those years ago making that building what it soon became, a human slaughterhouse. One question that comes to mind is, how did nobody know about what was going on here for so long? Well, they kinda did. Over the years, nearby residents heard screams, smelled the awful stench originating from the area, and noticed other odd occurrences. When they reported these things to the police, they were met with weird excuses, like that the area was used to take care of people who needed psychiatric help. The other common excuse used was that it was simply not in their jurisdiction. Both the demolition of the buildings and willful ignorance of the police have led to most believing there was blatant corruption in what seems to be a cover-up.
Writing petitions for years about this place, and we learned the response was they are taking care of mad people here. But if truly they are taking care of mad people here, why do we see dead bodies around?
Nobody has ever been charged in relation to this case, meaning the people who participated in this disgusting operation are still out there roaming the streets. It's also believed that the whole cover-up was meant to hide the involvement of some high-profile individuals in the Nigerian government and/or police force. So, after the operation was exposed and the building was demolished, what happened to the area? I mean, what else could they possibly do after destroying all evidence, leads, and maybe even burying other survivors alive? What are they gonna do? Build a school there? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. While we may have some answers as to what was going on in the Ibadan forest of horror, there are still many important questions left unanswered. What happened to Abakuda and the 8 others underground? How long has this whole thing been going on for? Who was funding and carrying out these horrific acts? And why did the Nigerian government seemingly cover up this entire case? Hopefully one day the truth will come out about all of this and those involved will be prosecuted and punished, allowing the friends and families of the victims to finally get some closure. Abakuda's actions on March 22nd of 2014 were extremely heroic, leading to the freedom of many kidnapped victims, ultimately exposing this truly evil and sadistic operation hiding in the shadows. On October 2nd of 2006, Washington, D.C. resident Robert Wone was found dead at his friend's house under mysterious circumstances. There were 3 individuals other than Robert staying at the house, who many believe all had some role in his murder. But first, let's back up a bit. Robert was a lawyer who was happily married to his wife, Catherine. Years earlier, in 1993, during his freshman year of university, Robert met Joseph Price. Even though Price was a senior and slightly older, the two hit it off and quickly became friends. After graduating, Robert had a tendency to stay in touch with old friends from school. During the summer of 2006, he began working for Radio Free Asia, a company based in Washington, D.C. that broadcasts accurate news to countries in Asia who may have corrupt media outlets feeding them propagandized news. Anyways, Robert had been taking long commutes to work, so one day he got in contact with Price, who agreed to let him stay the night at his place. Price was sharing the house with 2 other guys who he was in a polyamorous relationship with, Victor Zaborski and Dylan Ward. At roughly 10:30 p.m. on October 2nd, Robert entered the home, tired after a long day's work. He headed to bed almost immediately after getting there. At some point in the next hour, Robert Wone would be stabbed 3 times in the chest. According to a neighbor, someone in the house screamed once at about 11 p.m. At 11:49 p.m., Victor called 911, requesting an ambulance, stating that someone had just been stabbed. Paramedics arrived 5 minutes later and noticed something was off. There was only a little blood on and around Robert's body, which was unusual for 3 stab wounds to the chest area. Something else they later told investigators was that all 3 men, Price, Victor, and Dylan, were all weirdly calm considering the circumstances. Nonetheless, they carried him outside to the ambulance and drove to the hospital, where Robert Wone would be officially pronounced dead about half an hour later. So, what really happened that night? Well, according to the 3 men, Robert entered the home, took a shower, and then went to bed. All 3 of them also went to bed around this time. Shortly after, they heard the alarm system they had make a noise, as if someone, an unknown intruder, had just entered the home. The 3 men had headed out of their rooms and checked up on Robert, who they found lying unresponsive on the bed. They then stated that it was at this point where Victor screamed before calling 911. Now, investigators believed that most of this story, if not all of it, was a bunch of baloney. For one, neighbors heard the scream shortly after 11 p.m. The 911 call occurred at 11:49, which was between 30 and 45 minutes after the group had apparently discovered the body. Why would it take them that long to call the police? The paramedics also stated that when they arrived to the scene, Price was only wearing underwear. Victor and Dylan seemed to have just been in the shower considering they were in white bathrobes, which doesn't match up with the story of them being in bed right before calling 911, who arrived only 5 minutes after receiving the call. Autopsies showed there was an attempted suffocation, meaning the killer or killers either covered his mouth and nose with their hands or grabbed something like a pillow and used that instead. Though again, Robert's cause of death was the stabbing, so this method of asphyxiation was likely just an attempt. There were small needle puncture marks found on Robert's body as well, meaning someone most likely drugged him before his death. It should also be noted that there were no defensive wounds or any signs of struggle on Robert's body, which further validates the theory that he was drugged with something prior to his death. Unfortunately, the medical examiner must have happened to be Patrick Starr, who set the talk screen to Wumbo, considering the substance injected into Robert was never identified. Another thing found was that Robert had been sexually assaulted before his death. His own semen was found in that area. It should be noted that Robert was happily married to his wife, and he had never had any sexual relations with the 3 men in the house. Forensics also discovered that Robert likely wasn't stabbed in the bed. It looked like he was carried and neatly placed on the bed after the stabbing. It appeared as though he was cleaned up, considering there was much less blood in the area compared to other victims in different cases with similar wounds. It was all just weird. A cadaver dog was brought in who found traces of blood in the patio drain and inside a drying machine, as if someone in the house that night had cleaned and washed off blood. Investigators found a bloody knife on a table next to the bed. The thing is, this knife wasn't the murder weapon. It contained fibers found on a bloody towel near the bed, meaning someone likely wiped that previously clean knife with that bloody towel to make it look like the weapon that was used. Now, why would someone in the house do that? Well, there was one other knife in the whole house that was missing, and it belonged to Dylan Ward. See, Dylan had a cutlery set of knives used for cooking stored in his bedroom, and for some reason, one of those knives just happened to be missing that night. Police investigators made a duplicate version of the missing knife and found that it matched up extremely well to the wounds on Robert Wone's body. Evidence was stacking up against Price, Victor, and Dylan. Even if they weren't the ones who killed Robert Wone, they had to know who did. Investigators just couldn't believe the whole story of an intruder breaking in. Assuming an intruder actually did break in, he would have had to climb a fence higher than Shaquille O'Neal, sneak into the building, past everyone else's rooms, into Robert's, then drugging, sexually assaulting, and attempting to suffocate Robert before stabbing him 3 times in the chest, and escaping, all before anybody in the house heard anything. Fast forwarding to the trial, Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward were charged with obstruction, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. The judge stated that she believed the 3 men knew who had killed Wone, however, she ultimately found them not guilty, stating that she believed there was not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they were guilty of those crimes. So all 3 men were never officially charged with anything related to the murder of Robert Wone. It's commonly believed that those 3 men certainly had something to do with it, though until more evidence comes out or those 3 decide to speak up, we may never know what really happened the night Robert Wone was murdered. The year is 2017. A man named Teteke Kotsi was admitted to a hospital in Stellenbosch, South Africa. The man urgently needed an abdominal procedure and was soon taken in for surgery. The operation went well and Teteke was taken to another room to recover. The next day at 5:15 a.m., a nurse who was attending to and taking care of the man dipped out of the room to grab some fresh linen and bedsheets for him. When she returned to the room, only a few minutes later, Teteke was not in the bed. He wasn't in the bathroom either. The nurse searched everywhere for the man, but just couldn't find him anywhere in the building. Over the next day and a half, it's presumed that the hospital staff continued to search for the missing patient, without informing Teteke's family about the situation. When they eventually did call the family, the staff asked if the man had simply returned home. Of course, to the family, this came as a complete shock. They assumed Teteke was still recovering, so when they got the news he was missing, the family quickly rushed to the hospital. Police were soon called and an investigation was underway. Though still with added resources, Teteke was still nowhere to be found. 2 full weeks had passed with no new information. That is, until a couple construction workers who were renovating a small area in the hospital found a person in the ceiling of the building. They quickly called for help, and upon further inspection, the person was Teteke, who was now deceased. Over a week later, medical examiners at that same hospital ran autopsies on Teteke and discovered that he had not died from complications related to the surgery. It was something else. Unfortunately, this something else was never expanded on to the general public. The family told the public that they were told Teteke's death was not from natural causes, though strangely, the official police statements contradict that, stating that his death was in fact from natural causes. Now, before we talk theories, another case nearly identical to this one, also in South Africa, occurred 2 years later. On May 10th of 2019, a man named Sandiel Sibiya was admitted to a hospital following a construction incident where he broke his femur. For the slower ones out there, the femur is your thigh bone. So when femur go kapuya, you go hospital. Anyways, Sandiel was somewhat treated at the hospital, and in a few days he was preparing to get transferred to another one, where an orthopedic specialist would be able to better help him. Though before he could get transferred, he went missing. When hospital staff couldn't find the man, they immediately contacted police as well as Sandiel's family. Weeks passed before nurses and other staff began noticing an awful smell seemingly coming from one of the hospital's storerooms. Not long after, a black liquid started dripping down from the ceiling of that same room. Upon further inspection, Sandiel's body was found in the ceiling. Okay, so what actually happened to Teteke and Sandiel? There seems to be only 3 real possibilities. Either 1, the men for some reason climbed into the ceilings themselves and passed away up there. 2 complications actually did happen during the surgery or treatment in Sandiel's case, and the hospital staff covered up possible malpractice by putting their bodies in the ceilings. Or 3, they were murdered and placed in the ceiling as an attempt to hide the bodies. Both Teteke and Sandiel were 61 and 53 years old, respectively. Teteke had just undergone abdominal surgery, and Sandiel essentially had a broken leg. The two couldn't move that well with those injuries, and paired with their old age, I find it extremely unlikely that they themselves climbed up into the ceilings. I think this alone mostly rules out the possibility of them willingly climbing up there. With very limited information in regards to their autopsies, I think it's hard to either prove or disprove the possibility of the hospital cover-up theory. Though if something did happen to the patient and the hospital decided to cover it up, why would they choose to hide them in the ceiling? They're literal doctors. Surely they would know that in a week or two the body would start to decompose, right? So let's talk about the murder theory. Both incidents occurred in completely separate hospitals in South Africa. Teteke was in Stellenbosch, while Sandiel was at the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital in Durban, which are on the literal opposite sides of the country, making it even less likely that it was the same person or persons committing possible acts of murder. Assuming someone would have a motive or any reason to murder both men in the first place, why put them in the ceiling? Especially considering it would be pretty damn difficult to lift someone's dead weight over your head into a tight space like a ceiling. Personally, I have no idea what to believe. This case genuinely flabbergasts me because there's no good explanation that I can even think of. It's not like either of the two men were left alone for a long period of time. It was only a few minutes, so what the hell happened to Teteke and Sandiel? Let me know what you think of all of this in the comments below.